Thank you so much. It's been an amazing ride over the past 4 days. Who thinks that's true? Woo! Yay. Can you do that a little louder? Woo! Very good. Thank you very much. My wife had an insight on Monday when we went to the speakers dinner on the bus. This conference is now coming to a mad stop. Does anybody see what that is? This conference and this community and the job that is on the name of the conference is about spotting these things, right? Spotting what's wrong, spotting what's twisted, spotting what could be interpreted differently, seeing the in-between. And this is what I'm going to talk about. Okay, once is enough. So I'm not the only one fighting with slides. Interesting. Okay, so this is about changing our perspectives, looking at things differently. This is a total serendipity product. I asked Uwe, do you have a picture of this unicorn that I can put on my slides? Because I think the other thing is quite boring. And he said, I just send you what I have. And this is what he sent me. And then I asked George, which of the two do I pick? And we were looking at each other for like half a minute, and then I thought, oh, why don't I pick both? They're both lovely. So this is the real starting slide of my talk. Okay, integral quality. What does quality mean, and how can we build it into the organizations that we have? We've been talking about joy yesterday. Mike has been talking about joy. And I think it was in every keynote today. Selena said in the morning, you're working a third of your life, right? Why wouldn't you want to enjoy it? I think Mike phrased it differently in his slightly more rude voice and said, why would you want it to be shitty? I'm not sure if Tom had the same statement, but he definitely had the same sentiment. So, a woman who inspired me a lot, although I didn't meet her. This, again, was an influence of my wife. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago, and a woman was in Berlin who has something to do with chili. Do you know what Cantari is? Have you heard of Cantari.org? Anybody know that? Okay. Have you seen that woman before? Sabriye Tenberken. She's actually German, and she was born very close to my birthday, and I have a hard time even pronouncing her name, which is funny. This is where I stole that picture, by the way. You haven't heard of her? She's blind. She turned blind when she was 12. Her parents knew that when she was 2, and they didn't tell her because they didn't want her to be limited by the knowledge that she would lose her sight one day. The story, how she found out that she was actually losing her sight, it was not just getting worse, was moving. She was going to skate on a frozen lake in winter near her village where she lived. And she was used to people skating on that lake like in a very random, chaotic, fun fashion. And that day when she approached the lake, she saw that everybody was skating in very boring circles. And she thought, no, this is not something I want. I want everybody to have fun in a chaotic way. So she went straight in to the water. Because what she failed to see was that the ice was too thin in the middle. She has done some quite amazing things, although she was blind. One of them was that she went on horseback through Tibet in, I think, 2004. And she noticed how blind people are treated in Tibet, and she didn't like it. So she just decided to found a school for blind people, for blind children. Blind people in Tibet are not supported in any way. They do usually not get any education, because being blind is supposed to be the consequence of something bad you did in your former life. So it's supposed to be a punishment, and you're not supposed to get good treatment when you're being punished by being blind. she gave a very interesting example to the villages she visited, right? Because she was obviously able to communicate, she was educated, and the things that happened when she had this school and people got this education, I read an account of I think it was a 9-year-old child who went to that school and who was suddenly happy for being blind. And she asked him, why are you happy now that you're blind? And he said, well, I'm the only one in my entire region who knows how to use the internet. I can read and write. And that was not normal in that area. After doing this, she has moved on to found a school, or actually a leadership institute, is probably a good name, which is called Cantari. And she named it by this chili, which is very unassuming, very small, and makes a huge difference in your meal. And she was in Berlin 2 weeks ago, giving a reading and talk in a local bookstore near my home. And my wife was there, and she was totally impressed. And she brought me the book. And the book had this quote on the title, "Changing the world is an acquired skill." And I was looking it up on the internet. And the vision of this institute is, we see a world spiced by ethical visionaries and driven by integrity, equality, and empathy. And I was like, wow, this is so aligned with what I want to talk about. So I decided to integrate her into my talk. And I'm greatly thankful for this main message that I got from the few pages I've read so far in the book, which is change starts with me. No matter how bad I think I am or bad off, like being blind in a society where being blind is not really an advantage, I can do something. And this is very much in line with the message that I've heard over the past days, and the message that I wanted to make the core message of this talk, is that we all have the ability to make a difference. We all have the ability to do something to change our world. And it always starts with me. We see so many conversations and discussions and blame game things in organizations and elsewhere where somebody says, yeah, they do, they should, they don't. And if we simply start to change this conversation to what can I do? I've been guilty of going into organizations knowing that Agile is the way to go and that you have no idea how to develop products. It didn't work. I also have been in teams working on beautiful Agile deliveries, Agile transformations, and joining with everybody in they should change the way they manage this organization. Didn't work. I've learned that change starts with the leaders. I've learned that change starts from the top. We've heard that before. But that's not enough. When I go into an organization with the aspiration to make a difference, I need to change. With every single day I'm going into the organization, I'm learning how to make a difference. I'm learning how I can change so that I invite others to change too. Does that make sense? So, let's do some of this and use the learning and inspiration and all the great things that we have experienced at this conference. I would like you to think for a few moments. You may close your eyes if that helps you thinking. What are you grateful for? What would you like to say thank you for? In this conference, in this moment, this day, this week, anything you think you want to say thank you for. Just take a moment to think of a few things that are currently in your mind, in your heart, and that are meaningful to you. It would be a nice, chaotic, and messy way to end this conference if we would now take the time to deliver all of these thankful messages to everyone we want to deliver them to, and I don't have time enough. So I came up with another way to do this. When I've ended my instructions, I would like you to get up, to face a person next to you, and to, both ways, deliver all of this thank you to that person as if they were the person you are grateful for. Maybe you are grateful to that person for something, then just add it to your list. But if that's not the case, just pretend they are the cause of all the goodness that has come to you in this conference, and deliver a heartfelt thank you to them. And when you are getting this thank you from the person opposite you, just say, "You're welcome." And then you do it the other way around. Clear enough? Any questions? Go ahead. Find somebody next to you, thank them, thank each other. Keep standing, please. Stay standing. Stay standing and keep facing the person you've been talking to. There's another exercise, a silent one, including fewer words. It goes like this. Put your arms down. Put them out a little bit, like this. There will be no need to talk. Lean in a little bit. And now you have a choice. Thank you. Thank you. Always good to have somebody paying attention to the tooling, right? Yeah. Okay. So, how do we go about making this change, starting with me? One thing, which you just did, is show up with an open heart, recognizing another person for also showing up, and noticing how they recognize that you recognize them. This showing up as an honest and open and whole human being is the most effective way to make a difference that I know. And it's about knowing that you see somebody, letting them know that you see them, see that they see that you see them, and have this double bind. And as you have just demonstrated this skill, we can now create a Patronus effect. You know Harry Potter? How he had to do this big Patronus thing, and he knew he could do it because he knew he had done it before with this time turner wobbly thing. So you now know how you can show up. You can choose when to show up this way. I'm not expecting you to show up this way every day, every hour, every minute in your organization. That may not be appropriate. It may also not be authentic. But whenever you feel a little bit of joy, a little bit of gratefulness, a little bit of kindness, just showing it in a way that feels right to you, and have somebody see that, and have them see that you see it, that starts making a difference. That starts creating a connection that then enables something new to happen. I've been obsessed with the topic of choice awareness of choice, consciousness of choice, knowing about options. I'll be talking about real options in a minute for those who know what that is. But we talk about the Matrix first. Anybody who doesn't know this scene and the movie it's from? Okay. So, it's about a guy living in a fairly normal world, like our world, and he's a nerd, hacker, computer, whatever. The movie actually doesn't say if he's a programmer or a tester, so let's just assume he's a tester. He definitely knows how to break things. So, given Liz's definition of a developer and a tester, he's probably rather a tester. He's called Neo. And he notices cracks in his world. He notices that there are some things that are not real, that seem different from what they really are, or that are not coherent, or whatever. So he kind of tries to leverage into these cracks. And he hears about this other guy, which is this dark guy. He's called Morpheus. And they meet, and Morpheus gives him a choice. There are two pills. You can take the blue pill, go back into the matrix, pretend this meeting has never happened, pretend your world is real. Or you can take the red pill, see how far the rabbit hole goes, meaning see the reality behind the reality you're currently seeing. This choice comes with a context. The context being that Neo is already aware that something's wrong. Morpheus is offering help. He's not only offering the choice and the options, he's also basically saying, I'll take your hand and we'll jump together. He's not saying, here's the pill, take it, and right, you're on your own. And that's what happens afterwards. They kind of save the world together. There are a few things that I find really important about this choice. The first is, it has a very explicit option to say no. There's a scene later in the movie where somebody else goes back into the matrix, bites into a steak, and says, ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is a valid choice. Not changing is a valid choice. If we are working with people who are skeptic, who are simply comfortable in their comfort zone, who don't want to change, it's their choice. That's a valid option. And if we make that very explicit when we go into an organization or just work with one new human being, that has a very powerful effect. And the power of this effect of the choice we see at the very end. If you survive all of these machine battles through 3 long movies, at the very end, there's a scene where Neo is fighting Mr. Smith, who is an agent of this computer system and who tries to kill him all through the 3 movies. And he fights and fights and fights, and he's in the mud, and he's in the mud again, and he fights, and he is in the mud again. And Mr. Smith asks him, why don't you stop fighting? Is it because of love? That's just an illusion. Is it because of humanity? You know this world is not real. Why do you not stop fighting? And Neo says, because I've made a choice. Making a choice means you are responsible for your actions. It means you own your story. You own your own fate. One thing that I sometimes do when I observe blame discussions in organizations is that I ask people, is anybody in the room who was forced to sign the contract here? Is there anybody in this room who had a gun pointed to their head so that they entered this building this morning? Is there anybody here who's not here on a voluntary account? So do we want to do something about it, or do we want to make a new choice? So being able to make choices involves some pre-work. Work that we as coaches, we as people who lead change, who are interested in change, like Agile, can help with. And this is about awareness of options. This has been a mantra for me for the past 5 years, and it's changed my life in many more ways than I could count or that I noticed. Options have value. Options expire. Never commit early unless you know why. Repeat with me. Options have value. Options expire. Never commit early unless you know why. Options have value. Options expire. never commit early unless you know why. I've seen on Tuesday you can do this. Louder. Options have value, options expire, never commit early unless you know why. Very good. So what does this mean? There's an obvious meaning to these statements. Options have value. They obviously have a cost as well, but we are usually more aware of the costs anyway. So they have value. It's valuable choices. There's a second meaning. It's valuable to have options. You don't want to be in the corner, having no choice. Who has, in recent elections in your country, recently had the impression that it's not really a choice you have? Right? There are options, but they're not really different, or they're not really valuable. So having this awareness that it's important to have valuable options to move forward is very important. Options are changing over time. They expire. When I do longer talks about this topic, I usually have a tree with red leaves on this slide to show that expiry of options usually in a complex system always means transformation into new options. So being aware of the timeliness of your options, of the importance of making certain choices at a certain point in time, or waiting so that new options might come up. And how you do this is in the last rule. Never commit early unless you know why. And the second meaning here is be aware of what in your life is actually a choice, is an option, and what is a commitment. For me, and in most cultures I know, having this ring and having a commitment with my wife, that's a choice I made, I'm aware of, and this is a serious commitment. When I buy a ticket to Scrum Gathering, that is an option that can be sold or as a gift given away to somebody else, as we've just seen. When I buy a train ticket or a flight ticket or book a hotel room, that's an option. Many things in your life will probably have this quality of, I have to do this. This is the way it has to be done. Really? What happens if you don't do it? Does the world end? Or is it an option? And what is the value and the cost and the expiry of the option? So what this has helped me see is all of the obligations I had in my life, all of the things that limited my freedom, and becoming more and more aware and conscious of where I can actually make a choice. And sometimes it's just about your feeling, right? Being reminded of, okay, I work here on my own account. I decided to work here. I signed a contract. Gives me a totally different sense of ownership of my situation compared to, I have to come here every day and everything is so shitty, etc., and I can't do anything about it. Okay? So what has all this to do with quality? Everything. Let's start with a definition that you might be aware of, because the author has been here, as I've heard a few times. One possible definition of quality, one that I actually find quite practical and useful, is we should be functionally okay, performant, usable, useful, successful. One thing that I only noticed yesterday is that this pyramid is actually a quite oppressive structure. We like to simplify systems into a pyramid. And usually means the good thing is at the top, the bad thing or the suffering thing is at the bottom. Right? Looks like an org chart, doesn't it? And when you look at a food pyramid, right? The poor things are at the bottom. The humans are at the top of the food chain, right? So what happens when we change how we look at these things, right? Thinking back to changing of perspectives, hacking a system, finding the in-between. So when we look with a tester's eye at this thing, we could actually change it and say, quality is actually much more like an onion. Goiko copied this pyramid from Maslow's pyramid of needs, which has been proven wrong. It's not necessary to be fed and sheltered sufficiently to focus on self-actualization. People have done that in concentration camps and have been mindful and happy there. And I have been using software in my life which was not functionally okay. It was not really usable. And it was quite successful. Do you know such software as well? Word processing in the 90s, anyone? Okay, so when you look at an onion can look quite shitty from the outside and can be still beautiful and fresh in the inside, and vice versa. So when we turn a pyramid, wobble it a little bit, so that it doesn't look as rigid and strict and straight anymore, we see that all of these things are kind of related, but they're also messy. So we can focus on different things in the quality. By the way, I find these categories extremely useful to have a conversation in a team. Right? How do we make sure that we are functionally okay and deployable? How do we take responsibility for performance, usability, success? Depending on who's in your team, people might start saying, oh, that's somebody else's problem. And then you bring them into the room, and then you look at, how are we actually making this happen? How are we taking responsibility? What are the risks, and how are we mitigating those? Very, very interesting conversations. You can use that in retrospectives or any such settings where you want to make sense of how are we doing things and how do we want to improve. Extremely useful model for that. And this way to draw it, I think, is very much more helpful to actually have all these conversations because it doesn't have this linear, like simplified quality, right? So how do we get good quality in our systems? There's this law, Conway's law, which you might have heard, basically says, in the spirit of Tom and Mike, system is as fucked up as the organization that created it. So, what I've been thinking about for a while is, what if we turn this around? What if we say a system is as great as the organization that created it, and how do we create this greatness? How do we create the organization that reliably delivers beautiful, successful software? Or when you look at Richard Sheridan, Joy.inc, he writes, deep down, you know that there's a better way to run a business. Right? We want to have joy. We don't want to be in deep shit at work. Have you seen code like this? Can you feel the pain of the person who wrote this? Oh, has to change it soon? I was going to say next, right? And then you do get blame and you see your own name because it was your former self 3 weeks ago and you were in so much stress late at night that you don't even remember. Right? Who's been there? Okay. Is this code created by somebody who wants to create bad code? No. It's created by somebody who lacks clarity of intent. Either because in the organization, in the team, in the product, we don't really think about what we want, or it's so late at night, somebody's sitting on their back, etc., that they don't have clarity of thought at all. So my thesis is software quality is limited by how well the people creating it know what they want. And this is a conversation that we are discouraged from having the latest when we enter school in every country I know. Because we are told to be asking the wrong questions is wrong, to be giving the answer that's not the right one is wrong, to be too curious is wrong, to be different is wrong, right? So we're streamlined into asking the right question, giving the right answer, etc. And giving thought, giving time on the question, what do I want? Who am I and what do I want? Is something that we're not only too busy to do that, we are actually discouraged from doing that. And I think, when we look back at the pyramid, this is deliberate. It's not consciously deliberate. I'm not talking about anybody having made a conspiracy to enslave us. But when you look at how the society has developed, how our faith systems have developed, how our management systems have developed, they have been optimized to have us fit in. And our education is made to make us fit in, etc. We are a community of people who like breaking things. We are a community of people who like finding out where things don't work. And I think this system doesn't work. So, how do we get to this clarity of intent? I'm deeply grateful to my daughter, by the way, who is now 16 and who actually gave me permission to use this picture on a slide. So I lack clarity of intent there. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but I think even with that lighting, it's obvious. So how do we get that? This is a drawing that she created for me when she was a little older, about a model that I created for the last version of this talk I gave in Utrecht in the spring. You're standing on the ground of trust, surrounded by the boundaries of the context. And we need a shared protocol, a shared model, a shared purpose, and a shared experience to get value. I went into a lot of more detailed explanation in Utrecht, but we have already spent so much time on all of these things at this conference that I'm going to skip that. And I'm also only very briefly touching on the thing that inspired me to give the talk the title, which is this very interesting book, Reinventing Organizations. But what I keep from that book and from that talk and from that model is this history of how we have run human organizations. This history of, which I think is historically not really correct, as it is depicted here, of human beings being some sort of wolf pack, following the most powerful leader, where having power included having physical proximity so that I could hit somebody who didn't do what I wanted. That being replaced with human beings settling down and building larger organizations by the invention of rules and the invention of ownership, of power that is attached to a status. The Pope could, without physical proximity, set a rule in Rome, and the consequences of that rule would be carried out all over the world. In an army, somebody can set an order, and people who are not in that room, not near that person, will carry out that order. We've again changed the way we organize with the Industrial Revolution. We had this new idea of an organization like a machine. And we're still working with that model in most of our economy, in most of our organizations. Right? We're talking about processes, about optimization, about resources. We are setting a direction and then making the ship go there. A lot of the metaphors that we use when we talk about organizations are shaped by this industrial model and the model of an organization as a machine. With the globalization, the internet, and organizations that were mainly delivering software, the idea of having an organization like a family came into being. Focus on people, usually still having a hierarchy, a power hierarchy, but with the instruction to be a servant leader. Which is like, as Lalou, the author of the book, says in his talks, it's like giving kids on the playground guns and telling them not to use them. It is an interesting transitionary thing, so servant leadership. If you want to get rid of the negative effects of a power hierarchy in an organization, one good step is to tell your managers not to exert their power over other people. But they still have them. Empowerment is a concept that is typical of a green organization. I have the power, I give it to you, and if you treat it well, I won't take it back. Right? But it's still my power. I have empowered you. The interesting thing about this book, and why it was so inspiring to me, is Lalou went around the world and he visited new organizations. And most of the book is written like a curious child full of wonder and awe. And like, look what I saw, they are working like this, they don't have any managers, they don't have any power, the CEO here can't make any decision without asking his people. And he was discovering interesting patterns, and he was interpreting that as a recipe, which is where I hesitate to believe that's a good idea. So going around and looking at something that's evolving, and he calls this next stage evolutionary, and because of the color, he calls it teal. Anybody who's heard of organizations going teal? Have you read about this? Zappos is a good example, which was mentioned yesterday. And holacracy is interesting, but not what Mike said. And it's not teal. Holacracy is a very, very orange thing because it's based on rules and roles and processes and very, very defined things. If you hear somebody say, I will make something evolve, they have a very, very twisted understanding of the word evolution. Evolution is something that happens. You can't make anyone or anything or any animal or whatever, right? Imagine dinosaurs meeting and say, oh, these feathers are really cool, right? Birds seem to be the next best thing. Let's go bird. Right? So if you believe, which I do, that the next stage of human organizations is an evolutionary organization, an organization that is sensing and listening to its environment and discovering a purpose where we don't need people to have power to tell anybody what to do or how to do it. That's a beautiful thought. And there are organizations who are experimenting with this with great success, and that's amazing. But as we know in every agile organization, right, you've heard discussions about SAFe, about LESS, about Spotify. Jason Little has this beautiful slide show about people installing the Spotify model in their organization and then getting a syntax error in the setup file because, right? Look up his slides on SlideShare. It's amazing. Copying doesn't work, right? We know some of the principles, and Lalou has done a great job at discovering some and actually seeing some of those patterns, but we can't copy that. And I am highly disturbed by this thing being a linear scale, right? That, again, is not evolutionary. There's not a better or, right? This is an onion or a messy thing, just like the quality thing I started with. And the two key things to understand about these new organizations are integration and evolution. If in my organization, I can't be a strong leader who says no to any behavior that's not okay with me in this organization will have a very, very low level of accountability, and that, in my experience, means it will have a very low chance for success. Right? If there are no rules, like don't bully, don't be an asshole, don't kill your colleagues, right? And somebody is having a strong opinion and uses, if need be, some sort of force to keep people from doing this, then our system has a low chance of survival. So we need to integrate all of these learnings that we made over the millennia in human organizations, right? It's not different, it's evolving. So evolution is not making something happen. It's not about having the CEO understand that when the agile processes will work well and the Kanban flow will function well, that people will do what he wants them to do without him needing to micromanage. That might be true, but that is an effective orange organization. That's an effective machine. Right? If I can tell my car where to go and it takes me there, that's an effective machine. That's not evolution. So it's not about control. Evolution is about letting go. So if I talk to a leader who says, I want my organization to go teal, I say, if you're serious about that, get out of the way. Right? Leave a clear purpose, get out of the way. I heard a story of a guy who founded an organization in California. They were producing wine, and he had this instructions to his employees. He was usually not in the organization. He gave them a very clear purpose. He said, I'll usually not be there. You have everything you need. Just make this happen. And he had these instructions. There will be a time when you have the desperate need to call me and ask me for a decision. And what I want you to do then, I want you to lie down, wait for that feeling to dissipate, and then you get up and email me the solution. Right? That is the kind of leadership we need in a teal organization. It's not about having directions and everybody doing it without control. Integration. There are so many polarities in our world, and our brain loves them because it helps us. They help us categorize. They help us make easy choices, easy decisions, like black and white, good and bad, right and wrong, Scrum and Kanban. Right? You know how that works. Agile or testing. One strategy to deal with polarities is balance. Anybody familiar with the concept of work-life balance? Okay, who thinks that's a good idea? Who thinks being alive at work is a better idea? Right? If you want to balance two things, it means they are separate and different, like black and white. If you balance work and life, it means life is happening here. Right? I'm not saying this is a bad idea. It's important to start to think about this. But better is, or more healthy in my view, is when you integrate the two. Right? Not having a well-being manager or feel-good manager who makes sure that in addition to the enslaving work, you have some fun so that you come back. Who sets up a mindfulness program in your organization so that you are more relaxed with the stress and that you are more compassionate with your bullying manager. Right? Integrating life and work in a way that work is joyful. That's a different thing. Make sense? What we need to achieve this is clarity of intent. I mentioned that before. Clarity of reality. That's where this matrix thing comes in, the red pill. My hypothesis about why most change programs fail in organizations is that they don't even look at the real organization. They look at the organization we like to pretend we have. Because that's so much more safe. So much easier. And it's in my comfort zone, right? I know the org chart. Changing the org chart is easy. Looking at the real organization is much harder. So we need this clarity of intent and reality, and then we can also have a clarity of choice. The comfort zone was mentioned before. And Tom already said that it's really hard to leave your comfort zone. It takes two things. First, the courage to get up so that you can see something else. And then the trust, you need to actually leave it. And both of these things we can help with by showing up, by seeing people, by recognizing their pain. Remember the code I've shown? Right? See people when they are in pain. I've been a boss once in my life. I was nearly 30. I was offered the position because they wanted to have a weak person they could easily control. I took the job because who wouldn't, right? I was young. I didn't know any better. I had no clue about how to be a boss. I wasn't as courageous as Tom, who said, I'm an anarchist and I won't tell anybody what to do, and you figure it out. I thought I had to know all the answers, and I didn't. The only thing I assumed to know about that position was that I was not supposed to ask any questions. That was really painful. Most people in our organizations are good engineers and are promoted into this kind of position, and they have no idea how they got there, how they want to do their job, and they have no courage to ask. So the next time you are being angry about something your boss does, just imagine, what if he was perfectly aware that he was doing a shitty job, he had no idea how to do it any better, and everything he meets whenever he does anything is resistance and blame. And maybe offer help. Just see it and see what changes. Right? See what happens when you give them a choice. It doesn't always need to involve pills or... Lego might actually be a good tool to use in that scenarios. We spend a lot of time being angry about the past and being afraid about the future. And you remember what I said about options. Options only exist in the present. So if we want to have more choices, we need to find ways to deal with anger and fear. In the open space today, we had a session about mindfulness and different strategies we can use to become more mindful and leave this vicious cycle of fear, blame, judgment. At a conference last week, somebody was showing an org chart and saying, this is not an org chart, this is a picture of the blame flow of your organization. Yeah, everybody is laughing, but is this really how we want things to be? Right? Do we want to join that blame flow by laughing and supporting it, or do we want to do something about it? Chris Avery's responsibility matrix is an amazing thing. I don't have time enough to explain it, but that relates very nicely with the matrix. Get out of the matrix as soon as you say, I want to make a choice. Right? I stop laying blame, feeling obliged to do stuff, etc. I'm making a choice. I take responsibility because I want to. So taking this pill, showing up, that's what change starts with me means. And that's how we get quality into the organization. Right? The more you show up, the more you encourage others to show up, the more you take responsibility, the more you help others to do it. So you flip the coin by just doing the welcome thing that we practiced before, so everybody in the room knows you can do it. And we change the cycle to a positive one, to open this vast space of abundance, which we get when we think about the world and think about our organization as an evolutionary thing. Tom has talked about vulnerability. Mike has talked about vulnerability. Selena has talked about vulnerability. That's where it starts. Being authentic. Creating safety by being authentic, by showing up. And then strengthening our connections. Strengthening the trust. So how does this welcome work? There are two arms, two dimensions, which you can easily remember, and they open this curtain, creating the options that you need in the present. And they are forgiveness and acceptance. Forgiveness means I'm okay with things happening in this space that I might not like. And acceptance means I'm okay with things happening in this space that I do not understand. If you want to be a leader in your team, with yourself, in your family, with your whole organization, a leader where amazing things happen in your space, you want to be forgiving for things you don't like because you want people to fail, you want them to experiment. You want to be accepting for things you don't understand because of uncertainty, because of ambiguity, because you can't predict the future, right? And that way you open the curtain and you create options in the present. One truth I want to leave you with about trust and about people. You can trust every human being to eventually surprise you. Be the change you want to see. You might have heard that before. I hope I encouraged you and inspired you to think about how to do that. And I hope this inspired you to take some of the momentum, some of the ideas, some of the learning of this amazing conference home and make a difference. Make new choices. Hire me if you want unicorns in your organization. Make loving choices. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Questions? Do we have any questions?
You talked about teal. How do you spell it?
T-E-A-L.
T-E-A-L?
T-E-A-L.
Okay.
So it's a turquoise-like color. Yeah. So if you look for the book, the Reinventing Organizations book, it's yeah. If you just Google it, the word teal will show up in the context frequently.
Do you really believe in choice? Is it not just our education and our cultural background that is exercised? And do we really have a personal choice? Or depending how we've been educated and what has been our cultures, are we not going to just replay those things that have been ingrained in us?
There are two things that make it very, very hard to actually make conscious choices that are not in line with how you've been brought up. One is that our brain has a really, really strong preference for things staying the way things are and for you doing the things in the way you're used to. Those things are called habits. There's also a thing called neuroplasticity. You can rewire your brain. We know now that it works at any age, and what it needs is focused attention. So when you focus your attention on something, you are able to change a lot. The other thing is that we create stories in our brain. We are a story-driven, storytelling animal. And the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves determine and limit what we can do. So as soon as you start to change the story, you are telling yourself about yourself. Like the Patronus thing that I mentioned before, right? When you know you can do it, you can start actually doing it again. That's a little bit of a mind trick that overcomes this specific limitation. So yes, I believe change is possible. And it will always fail because of this habit, etc. I'm always puzzled, like when somebody stops smoking, stops drinking, any kind of addiction, losing weight, etc. We know that it takes time. We know that there are drawbacks, that it has failures, etc. But when a manager says, oh, we're going agile, we expect them to change their behavior tomorrow. And instead of focusing loving attention on helping them to develop the new behavior we want them to have, we're just blaming them, putting them into defense mode, which stops them from being able to change. And this is not true only for managers. It's just a very prominent example.
More questions? So, thanks so much, my dear. That's for you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been an honor.